Hello, my name is Allison Sills, and I'm the instructional librarian at CCCC in Lee County. I've been talking about privacy for about a year now, and some of you may have seen a presentation or a poster by me on this subject already. The more I read about this subject, the more fascinating I found it. Without understanding how far we've come and the struggles that brought us here, we risk losing privacy all too easily. So, today I'd like to talk about library privacy heroes through time. I'll talk about trailblazing librarians from the past and what we can do now about current situations. To quote the Pacific Library Partnership's data privacy best practices, without privacy, there is no intellectual freedom. Without privacy, users wanting to seek out certain types of information without restrictions or consequences have to go elsewhere. There are not many other institutions beyond the library that uphold a person's right to privately access information without consequence. Patrons have the right to privacy in the library. The American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights, Article 7 states all people, regardless of origin, age, background, or views, possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. Libraries should advocate for, educate about, and protect people's privacy, safeguarding all library use data, including personally identifiable information. Privacy is incorporated into many ALA core documents. Today, I'll show you how several came into being. Let's go all the way back to the dawning of the 20th century. While many people were excited about new technologies and globalization, some people saw those same forces as silencing of the voice of the individual. Their anger led to bloodshed, and several high profile assassinations happened, starting with the assassination of the Russian Tsar Alexander II in Russia in 1881, followed by the shooting of the Prince of Wales in 1900. He lived. The murder of King Hubert of Italy came later that same year and inspired the man who would go on to assassinate the U.S. President William McKinley in 1901. Needless to say, anti anarchist sentiments ran high. In 1906, the US and Russia were allies to the point that Russian spies were allowed to surveil locations believed to be anarchist hangouts. Libraries, which carried materials on many, sometimes controversial subjects, became such targets. You can see in this event that made national news that Russian spies were on watch in New York libraries and that they follow all who call for books on anarchy. Facts came out in this court case that the Russian government had under observation all libraries in the city, including the Jewish branches. It turns out that the librarians would give a heads up to the spies about who was reading what. And in this case, they followed an immigrant patron home and he was arrested. He was arrested for stealing books, and I can't find any further information about him, including whether he was jailed or deported. But it's worth noting that animosity at the time was not towards the Russians who were spying on U.S. soil, nor that the librarians were invading patron privacy. Rather, the library was critiqued for providing materials about anarchism in the first place. As World War I begins, Red Scare number one begins. Still fearful of anarchists and now German fascists, the U.S. government passes the Sedition Act, making it illegal to write, print, or publish anything critical of the U.S. government. You can see from this 1917 New York American newspaper cartoon that the U.S. Congress is whipping Lady Liberty. The government at this time requests the removal from the shelves books on anarchy and many German language books. Agents continue persecuting people who check out these books, and libraries, more conservative then than today, willingly join them as an instrument for propaganda. You can read all about it in this book. Privacy was only for the like minded. Patriotism rose to such a fevered height that even pacifist librarians were not immune, as is the case of M. Louise Hunt, a steadfast worker who despised war. Miss Hunt committed the most heinous crime of not buying war bonds, even as she ran the war bonds drive at her library. Her privacy was violated when an anonymous tip led to an interrogation by Liberty Loan officials who confronted her at work. She was reported to her director, who stood up for her, but the story was then leaked to the press and sensationalized, as you can see here. She would rather be ravished by a Hun than support the United States in this war. This was a completely fabricated quote. She never said anything remotely like this. What she did say was, I merely wish to claim the constitutional right privately to hold a minority opinion. And for that, she was threatened with being fired. When her director stood up for her, the director was threatened to be fired. That's how whipped up the town had become. Hunt decided to resign to keep the peace, and the board attempted to not accept Hunt's resignation because they wanted her fired. But Hunt did resign, and she moved to Wisconsin, where she was quickly hired as a library director at Racine Public Library. A code of ethics had been proposed for decades, but it was Flora B. Ludington who took a 10-year-old draft and shaped it into a statement to present for approval in 1938. Flora Ludington created National Book Week, chaired ALA's Special Committee on International Cultural Relations, aiding libraries in Europe and Latin America during World War II. She won the Joseph W. Lippincott Award in 1957, and she was ALA president 1953 to 1954. Ludington's Code of Ethics has changed several times in 85 years, but one thing that was original and constant was its intention to protect privacy, as evidenced in the words. It is the librarian's obligation to treat as confidential any private information obtained through contact with library patrons. Ernestine Rose served as a World War I service librarian in Paris, France, and Koblenz, Germany. She was also an author, professor, president of the New York State Library Association, and chaired ALA's Adult Education Board. Miss Rose redefined the meaning of branch libraries, working first at New York's Seward Park in the predominantly Jewish community. She then transferred to the 135th Street branch in Harlem, which had become a majority African American neighborhood after World War I. She integrated the then all-white library staff, hiring the first African American library workers and librarians. In 1926, she also purchased Afro-Puerto Rican scholar Arthur A. Schomburg's collection of African American literature that became the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. And I love this picture of her as a young girl. It was found in a 2005 in a dumpster of a recently deceased cousin. They were rescued just in time, as were other papers, when that relative's house went up for sale. In support of minority rights, Miss Rose introduced the first Library Bill of Rights. That document not only supported minority rights to use library spaces, but to also have access to literature and to literature that represents them. But as Rose pointed out when introducing the bill at the 1939 ALA Council meeting, that this is a very good time for libraries to take the stand, and to have it known in the communities they have taken the stand. That this is a constructively educational attitude and not simply a colored attitude. That only by promoting the knowledge of all sides of questions can people choose rightly their own point of view. One could make this argument today and replace colored, a word used at the time, with LGBTQ. Privacy isn't just an LGBTQ issue. It's an everybody issue affecting people searching for everything from how to get a divorce to caring for a colicky baby to sexuality and gender. Everyone benefits from strict privacy rules. And here's the bill as it was presented then. In 1939, the Library Bill of Rights did not specifically mention privacy, but in 2019, after the double whammy of the Patriot Act and Edward Snowden whistleblowing that the NSA was tracking our every phone call and text, the ALA finally added Article 7 to the Bill of Rights. And it says, all people, regardless of origin, age, background, or views, possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. Libraries should advocate for, educate about, and protect people's privacy, safeguarding all library use data, including personally identifiable information. After World War II, Red Scare number 2 happened. Russia had become the communist Soviet Union, and anti-communist McCarthyism began in the USA. President Truman created the Federal Employee Loyalty Program, and citizens and librarians find themselves investigated, including what organizations they belong to and what newspapers they read. Loyalty oaths were drafted and presented, with some being very thorough, including California. When half the staff of the LA County Library System quit rather than sign such an oath, staff member Julia L. Steiner sued. The only information I can find about her was that she was a country librarian of old New England stock. Her case became the first loyalty oath challenge decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. She is found to have no standing because she wasn't fired, but many people after her are fired and they also sue. They also lose their cases, and loyalty oaths are still legal to this day. You can see this cartoon mocking the oaths from the 1949 Washington Post. The ALA quickly meets to discuss these loyalty oaths, and one woman who speaks up is Charlamagne Hill Rollins. Miss Rollins was an African American librarian at Chicago Public Library for more than 30 years and quite active within the ALA. She was a leader in children's literature and librarianship and championed the creation of African American literature that was written free of racial and ethnic distortions. She wrote several books about African American literature, including We Build Together, A Reader's Guide to Negro Life and Literature. At the 67th Annual Conference of the American Library Association in 1948, the ALA agreed that librarians must be free to practice their profession without fear of dismissal for political, religious, or racial reasons. Miss Rollins spoke up about what had happened to her. She said, "All the people up and down my stairway have been questioned as to what do I read, what magazines do I take, what organizations do I belong to." The ALA passes the resolution on loyalty programs a couple of years later in 1950, stating that the ALA strongly protested loyalty programs which inquired into a library employee's thoughts, reading matter, associates, or membership in organizations. Miss Rollins would have another more positive encounter with patron privacy in 1950. I'm going to play this short clip from the Studs Terkel radio archive where he interviewed Miss Rollins in 1970. They speak about her new book called The Christmas Gift, but they also talk about Gwendolyn Brooks. Gwendolyn Brooks was the first African American writer to win a Pulitzer Prize in 1950 for her book of poetry called Annie Allen.
You couldn't leave out Gwendolyn Brooks.
No, who grew up in our library, I might say.
Did she? Here's our Pulitzer Prize winner, Chicago's
Yes.
Pulitzer Prize winner, Gwendolyn.
Yes.
Living. Did she come to the as a small girl? She came
As
to
a
the.
little girl in 6th grade, she used to bring her poems into our sub-branch to Miss Marion Hadley, who was head of the sub-branch. And Miss Hadley would put them up on the bulletin board, and then Gwendolyn would go home and get her mother to come and see the poems on the bulletin board. She was a very prolific writer, and she wrote these poems as a child.
So you remember Gwendolyn Brooks as a small girl?
I don't remember her as a small girl. I just knew that she came in.
But she used to come in there.
But a nice story. One day in the library, the telephone rang, and Miss Harsh, who was our librarian, you met her then, she's no longer alive now, went to the phone, and it was one of the Chicago newspapers saying, would you please give us Gwendolyn Brooks' telephone number? And Miss Harsh said, why, no, we don't give out our telephone numbers of our patrons. And the voice said, well, you have to. She's just won the Pulitzer Prize, and we can't find her in the telephone book. Well, you'd have thought that we had won it, because by that time we had read, we knew that she was.
I suppose the whole place got so excited.
The whole place was so excited, and we were excited because we knew that she had won the prize before she did.
Now let me play you another video of Gwendolyn Brooks speaking about receiving that phone call.
How did you hear about it? Because it's always a thing in terms of the person being notified. How did you hear about it? Where were you when you heard you had won the Pulitzer Prize?
I was in a house at 9134 Wentworth, and the lights were out. That's been told many times by now. We hadn't paid the electric bill, so there was no electricity. And it was dusk, so it was dark in the house. My son was 9 at the time. Jack Starr, a reporter on the Sun-Times, called. He is now associated with Chicago Magazine, was one of the editors, senior editor, till just recently. So he said, do you know that you have won the Pulitzer Prize? And I said, no, and screamed over the telephone. I couldn't believe it. So he said, well, it was true. And it would be announced the next day. The next day, reporters came, photographers came with cameras, and I was absolutely petrified. I wasn't going to say anything about the electricity. I knew that when they put in their when they tried to attach their cameras and all, nothing was going to happen. However, miraculously, somebody had turned the electricity back on that fast. I've never known exactly what happened.
I love this story because it shows one example how there are no absolutes, that librarians must also use common sense when giving out information. Jack Starr was a well-known local reporter in Chicago at the time. By 1953, McCarthyism and book bannings and burnings had become so pervasive that the president himself speaks to it in a speech delivered at Dartmouth. Dwight D. Eisenhower says, "Don't join the book burners. Don't be afraid to go in your library and read every book, as long as any document does not offend our own ideas of decency. That should be the only censorship." This statement relates to privacy because fear of surveillance leads to people self censoring to escape potential discrimination or retaliation, which people were most definitely facing at this time. The loyalty program became a purge of gay federal employees who were deemed security risks. According to the Louise Robbins article, No Communists or Blank Suckers, please just look at my references for the actual word. Just at the Library of Congress, at least one librarian was fired, 9 more resigned under pressure, and 5 cases were pending during the only time this was ever discussed due to its sensitive subject. Remember Miss Ludington from the Code of Ethics? She had a hand in creating another remarkable ALA document, the Freedom to Read Statement. The same year as Eisenhower's speech, the ALA created and distributed the Freedom to Read Statement, which includes many phrases that imply privacy is important, including this statement. We are aware, of course, that books are not alone in being subjected to efforts at suppression. We are aware that these efforts are related to a larger pattern of pressures being brought against education, the press, films, radio, and television. The problem is not only one of actual censorship. The shadow of fear cast by these pressures leads, we suspect, to an even larger voluntary curtailment of expression by those who seek to avoid controversy. This reinforces what Eisenhower said, that individuals' reading choices should not be subject to external judgment or pre-labeling, thereby protecting patrons' right to privately explore ideas without intrusion or having their selections publicly scrutinized. In 1970, the Vietnam War was ever present in the news, as are anti-war protests. Librarians begin reporting to the ALA that IRS agents are asking staff for a list of the people checking out any bomb-making books. After these inquiries make national news, North Carolina Senator Sam J. Ervin Jr., chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights, calls for Secretary of Treasury David M. Kennedy to answer questions about it. Ervin says, "I know that many members of Congress share my concern that practices so contrary to the Constitution of the United States and so inimical to intellectual freedom could be allowed or authorized by any federal department for any purpose. This is so because throughout history, official surveillance of the reading habits of citizens have been a litmus test of tyranny." What he discovers is that it was not the IRS, but another department under the Treasury, the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Unit, that made the inquiries. Kennedy responds, "The names were copied from the library records for comparison with suspects in specific bombings. This information was furnished to the police, the FBI, county sheriff, police, and Secret Service." Irvin did get some answers, but Kennedy makes no promises to stop asking for patron records. But at least there was an inquiry, and they did discuss it. Judith Krug is one of the most important figures in the fight for the freedoms we hold today as librarians and library patrons. She was a staunch supporter of the First Amendment. She helped found the Freedom to Read Foundation. She started Banned Books Week. She won the Joseph P. Lippincott Award for Leadership and was the first director of the Office for Intellectual Freedom, a position she held for 40 years. In response to the Treasury Department's overreach, Krug introduced the policy on confidentiality of library records. This policy officially outlines that libraries are to keep circulation and other records identifying the names of library patron users to be confidential in nature and to keep those records confidential except pursuant to such process or order or subpoena supplied by law enforcement. Zoya Horn, born in Ukraine, immigrated to the U.S. at 8 years old. Her love for civil liberties began at an early age. In 1971, she was head of the reference department at Bucknell University, where she was active in peace activism. Because of an acquaintance with Father Philip Berrigan, she was approached by the FBI for information on the leader of the Harrisburg Seven, a group that was accused of conspiring to bomb heating tunnels in Washington, D.C. Horn refused to cooperate, and when called to witness said, "Spying in libraries and schools is something I protest." She was found in contempt of court and thrown in jail for 20 days. You can see in this photo she's handcuffed in the back of a cop car being led away to jail. She is the first U.S. librarian jailed for an act of conscience. She was released when the case fell apart because the only witness was a felon released to infiltrate activist groups, and he was revealed to be the idea man behind the entire enterprise. Horn would go on to join the ALA Freedom Committee, working with Judith Krug. She would also introduce the Resolution on Government Intimidation to the ALA. In it, the ALA again states a stance that recognizes the danger to intellectual freedom presented by the use of spying in libraries by government agencies, and requests that the confidentiality of the professional relationship of librarians to the people they serve be respected in the same manner as medical doctors to their patients, lawyers to their clients, and priests to the people they serve. What no one would know in 1973 is that the FBI started an initiative called the Library Awareness Program to surveil library patrons. Even without the internet and instant communication, word quickly got back to the ALA that libraries were again being approached for information. In 1975, the ALA reasserts again that patron confidentiality is one of the library's primary concerns in a statement on professional ethics that says, librarians must protect the essential confidential relationship that exists between the library user and the library. But it doesn't stop. In fact, it intensifies. And in 1988, the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Civil and Constitutional Rights met to discuss the FBI's Library Awareness Program with the librarians and the ALA governance and the FBI. You can watch the entire show on C-SPAN. Also in attendance at the subcommittee meeting was Judith Krug, who argued that librarians aren't trying to be obstructionists. We are just trying to protect patrons from blanket and baseless searches. Any request with a legal subpoena is honored. One of the speakers is Herbert Forrestal, who resisted FBI intrusion at the University of Maryland. Not only did he instruct his staff not to comply with requests without proper subpoena, but he played a pivotal role in advocating for Maryland's state legislation guaranteeing library records privacy. He also wrote the definitive book on the Library Awareness Program called Surveillance in the Stacks. Here is a cartoon from the book, which was printed in the 1988 Washington Post. Krug and Forrestal's work to bring this FBI program to light not only ends the program, but also starts a cascade of state laws across the country to protect library patron privacy, including North Carolina. Privacy experienced a short renaissance until about 2001 when 9/11 happened. The war on terror began that day, and within a month, the Patriot Act had passed. Libraries could now be surveilled legally, no subpoena required. By June of the next year, rumors were again circulating that the FBI had been requesting patron records, but no one can officially talk about it because they are also being hit with gag orders attached to the subpoenas. In a library survey around 2002, 8.3% of 1,020 public libraries report patron records requested by law enforcement. You can see from this cartoon published in 2005 people's thoughts on the intrusions. The ALA releases guidelines that advise libraries to avoid creating unnecessary records and to start employing data minimization techniques. In 2004, 4 librarians dubbed the Connecticut Four, along with the ACLU, sued to break the Patriot Act gag order that was silencing them from talking about the Patriot Act-backed library patron surveillance. They also bring to light that even though the Patriot Act was intended to surveil foreign actors, that those searches allow 2 hops from the primary suspect, meaning that one person with 200 contacts who each had 200 contacts would ensnare 40,001 people. They win their lawsuit, and their success alters the law. Gag orders are removed. And I'll play one snippet from the Connecticut Four speaking at the Vermont Library Association. This is also on C-SPAN.
For those of you, I don't know if everyone can read it. This is a snippet of the Connecticut General Statutes. Connecticut, like 47 of the other states, has a law on the books that protects patron privacy and the privacy of patron records in libraries, and charges librarians with responsibility for ensuring that that privacy is maintained. which is one of the reasons that we decided to object to the complying with the national security letter. Our other concern, as Trina alluded, is libraries are one of the foundations of democracy. It's a place where every citizen can go to get unbiased information on whatever topic they're interested in, and whether they want to investigate Wahhabism or large corporations or whatever they want to read about. They need the freedom to explore that topic without the fear that someone is going to look over their shoulder and second guess why they were interested in that particular topic. But to move away from the political and into the mundane. We're also here for the woman who wants to investigate spousal abuse or divorce and not have it become community knowledge that this is what she's thinking about, or breast cancer, or the man that's interested in prostate cancer. This is where young adults can come to learn about sexuality, sexually transmitted diseases, whatever. This is a place where people can come for unbiased information, and they don't need anyone to know that they've been there or they were interested in those particular topics.
Incidents of law enforcement coming for library records increases. Here are just some of the headlines. Protecting Americans from warrantless surveillance. Thought police, Big Brother may be watching what you read. 4 librarians finally break silence in records case. Librarians versus the NSA. FBI begins visiting libraries. FBI checking out Americans' reading habits. Bookstores, libraries can't do much to fend off search warrants. And remember Edward Snowden before? He pointed out in 2013 that the NSA is tracking every phone call and text. In 2019, the ALA adds the 7th article to the Library Bill of Rights. In 2023, North Carolina passes the Parents' Bill of Rights. It contains one line that references libraries. It says that parents have the right to review all available records of materials their child has borrowed from a school library. And that is law, and no one's disputing that. What is in dispute is how we retain records, especially at the community college level, which is not a high school. When we had Cersei Dynix workflows, patron checkout history was turned on for all members unless you turned it off with permission from your school president. Now that the majority of us use Evergreen, this is less of a concern because patron checkout history tracking is turned on by the patron, not the library. But please be aware that Evergreen can print reports that list a patron's checkout history, whether they have it turned on or not. The ALA has guidelines for vendors, but I'm not here to talk about what those guidelines are, or the politics surrounding them, or why it's possible or not. Just be aware that it is. So, what can we do now? Here is a list of things the ALA recommends to protect patron privacy. First, employ data minimization by limiting the data you collect in the first place. For instance, besides Social Security numbers, which I don't believe anyone's keeping these days, we don't even keep birthdays. Second, regularly purge patron accounts. Retain records for the shortest time allowed by law. Third, anonymize whenever possible. Allow for anonymous reference questions such as anonymous chats or phone calls, and never record conversations. Fourth, establish clear privacy policies and make that policy public. The ALA is a wonderful resource if you want to perform a privacy audit or just to get tips. Check out their website at www.ala.org/advocacy/privacy and educate your staff on best practices to implement your policy. Educate patrons too about the benefits and the pitfalls of turning on patron history tracking. Most people won't care, but some will. Here's a link to a LibGuide I made on this subject with much more information at cccc.libguides.com/privacy and libraries. And here's a QR code to my references for this presentation. There's just too many to put on a single slide. You can visit this link or you can visit the LibGuide from the previous slide. Everything's cited there also. Again, I'm Allison Sills, and here's my email. Thank you very much for listening.